Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who is joining in to the webinar on the future bioenergy opportunities, emerging markets in Brazil and beyond. My name is Bharadwaj Kumamuru. I'm the Executive Director for the World Bioenergy Association. Please bear with me a minute when I share my screen because we have a very short introduction. Let me know if you don't see the slides, but I would like to inform you that this is actually the third webinar in our Brazilian series. We had the first webinar on policies and regulations a couple of months back, and then the second webinar on South-South cooperation last month. This is a third webinar on a three-part series, which is looking at bioenergy opportunities in Brazil. And this will focus on emerging sectors and markets and what are the opportunities for bioenergy in that. Uh, Before we proceed with the webinar, a brief introduction about the association. As some of you have been with us in previous webinars, but some of you may be joining us quite for the first time. We are an industry association with a mission to promote the sustainable development of bioenergy technologies. And when I say bioenergy, it includes all types of bioenergy solutions, including solid, liquid, and gaseous fuels. On the left is a mixture of all our members. Those include national and regional associations, but also companies in the biomass to energy value chain. And in terms of our activities, our primary focus is advocacy. So international advocacy as an observer to the UNFCCC, ARENA, and other intergovernmental organizations where we promote bioenergy. We also do events, give a networking opportunities such as these webinars, but also knowledge is an important part of our work through our work on bioenergy data, but also latest technology developments. Moving on to the webinar that we have today, some of you may know the last month, the Belém pledge on quadrupling the sustainable fuels globally has been initiated. And this was launched in Brasilia last month, but then it will be, as I understand, endorsed in the next couple of days at the climate summit that will be happening in Brazil before the COP that happens in Belém in the next few days. And most importantly, the key target or the headline target is quadrupling the amount of sustainable fuels. That includes biofuels in the energy mix by 4 times by 2035. And when you look at, there's a various support schemes that are mentioned in the pledge, but most importantly is on providing opportunities for bioenergy in various markets by collaboration in finance, on technology, on capacity building, and so on. And to understand the role of bioenergy in these emerging markets and what are the challenges and what do we see as its role in the future energy mix, we have an excellent lineup of experts, as you can see there, who will talk about the role of bioenergy, including biogas and liquid biofuels in markets such as aviation, heat power, as well as marine fuels. That is a very short introduction. In terms of the format that we have today, we expect the whole webinar to last about 90 minutes or so. We'll have 4 presentations, and we'll try to have a couple of questions after each presentation. So if you have the audience who are joining us today, if you have any questions, please feel free to post it in the chat, and we'll try to address that to the speakers as much as possible, depending on the time permitting. And with that, I'll stop my introduction, and I'm pleased to give the floor to our first speaker, Renata Beckett Isfer from Biogas, the leading biogas association in Brazil. And the floor is yours, Renata, and we look forward to hearing the work of the association and where do you see bioenergy opportunities in the country.
Thank you very much, Baraja. Sorry if I didn't say that right. And it's an honor to be here with you and to talk especially about biogas and biomethane. I'm really glad I'm the president of the Biogas Association. I'm sharing here our presentation, and we are very excited and looking forward to COP, especially after the Belém Pledge. We believe we are in a new international scenario where the world started to see the importance of sustainable fuels for the energy transition. Before you would go to international meetings and countries were talking only about hydrogen and about electricity and electrification. And I believe this year I've seen a change where we are now talking about the importance of sustainable fuels and that they are indispensable for the energy transition. And the International Energy Agency has been talking about that. And Brazil started the dialogue and talking about it last year, actually, at G20. And I see it has evolved, and I do believe that it will make a difference in the next years, and it will surely help, and it will surely make the world reach carbon neutrality by 2050. So I'm really glad to be able to contribute in this scenario, and I believe that COP30 will be a landmark in this subject, as we will start seeing from the manifestation that will be happening this Friday regarding quadruplifying the compromise to make it 4 times bigger, the production of biofuels and sustainable fuels that will happen this Friday. So anyhow, I'm going to present to you what's been happening in Brazil and what we expect to the future, and what are policies that exists here in Brazil, and what are the challenges that faces us in this meantime. So Biogas is an association. We represent the whole chain of biogas and biomethane in Brazil. We have around 160 associates here, and we try. Our main goal is to make it to make biogas and biomethane reach its full potential. Right now, our production is not as big as it should be. Most of the production nowadays it's used to generate electricity. We have around, actually this number is of 2024, but we have 1,600 biogas plants, and it grows kind of fast if you look at the chart on the right, but compared to the energy generation in Brazil, it's very low. It's not a lot of electricity if you compare to the demand that exists in Brazil. But when you take a look of how the electricity system is designed in Brazil, they do not give value to all of the attributes of biogas in the system, the attributes that actually the system needs in order to have energy security, in order to do not need so many, in order not to be so expensive, because it actually end up buying I don't know how to say that, but the energy at high prices at the times that the wind and the solar panels they're not working. But in the end of the deal, we do have a lot of room and a lot of demand for biogas related energy. And right now, what we're looking for is biomethane. Especially when you think about transportation, most of and in industry as well. So what we are looking at is like a big ramp up of the production of biomethane in Brazil. So most of the investors that they were looking for generating electricity, right now everyone is looking at producing biomethane. Right now we have 40 biomethane plants. Some of them, they are self-consumption, but we have 16 authorized plants authorized by our agency, which means that they can be used in the pipelines, they can be used for vehicles, for trucks. And that's not a lot of plants, but if you consider that 1 year ago we only had 6, and that we have another 40 plants awaiting authorization in the agency for this same authorization, you see that it is growing, and we still expect many more plants to start construction this year and the next few years. Right now, if you take a look at the installed capacity that we have here in Brazil, it's about 1 million cubic meters a day. But we believe that by the end of this decade, we will have at least 10 million cubic meters a day, which means we'll more than make it 10 times bigger. But when you talk to the producers, we believe it might be even bigger if we end up if we take a look and surpasses some of the challenge, some of the bottlenecks that we are actually looking into, and that the governments, they are actually engaged in making the necessary changes in order to make the production as big as we want. And actually, there are other international questions that are related to it as well. For example, when you look at IMO and the postponement of the decision regarding biofuels for the maritime fuels, if they had decided, like right now, like on the last meeting, that we could use bio LNG for the decarbonization that we are expecting by 2030, it can make a big difference if we decide that by next year, by 2026. It will also be a great incentive for this growth, because a lot of the plants, we have a lot of potential, as you can see in this slide here. We can end up producing 120 million cubic meters a day. This is like a theoretical potential that considers only organic residue. This is only waste. We are not talking about any energy crops here. This is only waste and only residues, but it's a huge potential. Most of them, half of it, it's in the state of São Paulo, so it's very concentrated, which is a good thing when you think of the infrastructure necessary. And if you have the necessary international framework, we can be a very important player in decarbonizing aviation and maritime transportation. So especially when you, and actually industry as well, if we can get our certificates for the use of biomethane recognized by international standards, or we actually, if we can get the countries themselves to set those standards in a measurable way, that the industry can be safe and secure, that if they use our certificates of origin and they change, for example, their diesel for biomethane, that the reduction of emissions or the emissions avoided when you are producing the biomethane, that those are being considered, and that reduction will be considered in their inventory, then we will make it a big difference, and we can get to this huge potential that you are looking into it. And if you pay attention here, even though right now, and I'll show you in one of the next slides, sanitation plays a big spot. When you take a look at today's production, when you look at the main scenario, at the main potential, it's basically mostly made of the agricultural system. And between the agricultural system, it's mainly the sugarcane industry, the residues from sugarcane industry, mainly vinhaça and torta de filtro, which are the two main ones. But you already see plants using other kind of residues from the sugarcane industry as well. And here is just a slide just to make sure, just so you know, because there's always a lot of talk when you talk about biofuels. There's this I don't know, this bias, I would say, that there is a risk to food security, and that we should be producing food, and there's a risk. There is like this competition between food and fuels, and this definitely doesn't happen in Brazil, even when you think about biodiesel, or if you think about ethanol. But specifically when you talk about biomethane, we just use organic residue, and actually we can be a big help for food security, because we generate our digestate. I don't know how to say it right, but the digestate and even other kinds, they can be used as fertilizers, and you can make fertilizers from biomethane. Actually, we do have a plant here in Brazil of renewable ammonia made by biomethane that it's used as biofertilizer. So we can add to food security because we promote circular economy in this industry, in this food industry chain. So actually we are a good asset. And when you think about organic residues of municipal residues, we are talking about a country where 40% of its municipal waste residues, they are not treated. So when you think about biomethane, it's an incentive for the municipalities to start treating their residues, because today it is a health problem in Brazil, because they will just throw it in this land, in this space where it promotes disease, where it can hurt the water that flows under the soil. I don't remember how to say that in English. And it's a big problem for dengue, for Zika virus, and many other diseases that comes from this. So actually, biomethane is a solution for health problems in Brazil that should be fomented in order to make life better, especially for families that do not they are in the lowest part of the social chain, the poorest ones. As I was saying before, if you take a look, most of the plants in Brazil, they come from the agricultural system. But when you think of the installed capacity, when you think of volume produced, most of it comes from landfill. But today, because what happens, because the capex is smaller, and it's closer to the consumers, and you can produce more from less investment. So that's how it is today. But we see a change for the next few years, and we do believe that because of big plants that are being constructed in Brazil from sugarcane industry, we will have the biggest volume coming from the sugarcane industry. When you take a look at the next 2-3 years, the scenario will be totally different than it is today. Again, basically today, 59% of the use of biogas goes for electricity and 37% for biomethane, but that also is changing fast. And in the next 2-3 years, it will be different, and we'll be seeing most of it being used for biomethane production. It's a change that's coming fast too. If you take a look at what this represents to Brazil, the full potential, we could substitute 60% of diesel consumption in Brazil. And the important thing, another important fact, is that we are still importers. We still import most of our fossil fuels, such as LNG, such as gasoline, diesel, and we could change that and not be dependable on other countries and other importation if we could produce biomethane here and use that for our cars and our trucks and all of that. And we could use it to generate many jobs, almost 800,000 jobs, and to decarbonize and to generate 350 billion in investments. I don't think I have put it here. Here are some cases. I don't know how I am in time, but what I was going to say, because I'm worried about how much time I have.
2 more minutes. It's okay.
2 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll go to the programs that we have. I'll skip the cases, but if you are interested, then I can share with you the cases that are in this presentation. But what we do have, it's like 3 main programs, federal programs that we can talk. RenovaBio is the it's kind of getting old now, but it was our main program, and it is for all biofuels. It was a certification program where they actually demanded from all of the distribution, liquid fuels distribution, that they had to buy certificates that would be given, that would represent a ton of carbon that were not being emitted because of biofuels production. So it was just this big incentive for biofuels, okay, and the reduction of GHG emissions, considering the transport sector. And it has started. It has a lot of results already in Brazil. I don't have them here, and I don't have time to talk a lot about it, but it's a big success case of Brazil. This one is the new one. It's the one that makes our eyes brighter, and that makes us very happy. Last year, we had approved a program for decarbonization of natural gas and an incentive for biomethane. So what happened here? First, we created a certificate of origin of biomethane, and it has to be used for a mandate. So all of the natural gas producers and importers, they have to decarbonize 1 to 10% of its GHG emissions by the acquisition of biomethane. So they have to make a calculation to change it to volume, and they have to buy this volume of biomethane or of the certificate. They don't need to buy the volume itself. The volume can be sold not as biomethane, but then as just as any gas to other users. But they do have to buy it, and that will be a signal to the market that they can produce, because there will be buyers. Because we had a problem of the egg and the chicken, where you had people that wanted to produce, you have people that wanted to invest in infrastructure and technologies, and you did have demand, but the demand was very shy. And so with this program, you actually got to connect all of these dots and all of this network. And now what we are seeing is that the producers are actually very engaged in buying our biomethane, and the producers are very active in producing, and the infrastructure and technology, they are very excited to be on this panel. Even the natural gas infrastructure, they are like, when you talk to them, they're like, whoa, we love biomethane. It opened a door for many opportunities that they weren't expecting. And that's something that it's going to happen. We still need some regulations to come up, and after the regulation, it needs to be implemented. But from all of our talks to ANP, the regulations will be 100% complete by the 2nd of March of next year. So in 4 months, we'll have everything done. And the mandate will start in January 1st of 2026. So it won't be a problem, because we will have the certificates to start. They will be being issued next year, and everything is working as planned. So we are very excited by that. The other thing, we had a tax reform that guaranteed that the taxes for biofuels, they have to have a discount, they have to have lower tariffs compared to fossil fuels, and it'll make a huge difference. For example, we expect it to be 40 or 50% of the alíquotas of the tariffs of the fossil fuels, and that will make it more competitive. And that's a great thing. It will start being implemented in 2029, but as everything goes so fast, 2029 will be right there. And in the end, just another thing, the states and even the federal government, they are also looking to give incentives to change the fleet, the transportation, the road trucks, the heavy-duty trucks and the buses to biomethane. And basically, that's what's going on in Brazil. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm here if you have any questions later.
Yes, great. Thank you. I mean, that was a very sort of a scene-setting presentation. You shared a lot of information on the status, on the socio-economic benefits, the potentials. Definitely, the case studies would be very interesting for the audience, but we can inform that we'll share the slides with everyone after the webinar. There were a lot of questions. Some I think we could take it a bit later in sort of a round conversation. But there was one quick question on the average size or the capacity of the plants. You mentioned about 1,600 biogas plants. What sort of is the average capacity for these biogas plants?
The biogas plants itself, they're not, most of them, they are not very big.
Yeah,
The biogas plants, I don't know. I could answer the biomethane plants.
sure. Biomethane. What would be the
Okay,
capacities?
the biggest one, the biggest biomethane plant we have is around 200,000 cubic meters a day.
Okay.
I can look at the questions here at the chat and I can answer some of them on the chat
Excellent.
if it helps.
Excellent. That would be great. Thank you so much for your presentation. And now, before we move on to the next speaker, I just wanted to highlight that we have the whole webinar series has been made possible by a couple of partners. One is SB Bioenergy Society from Brazil, and also Bioenergy International, who's our official magazine, and they have excellent information on the latest bioenergy developments. And I would encourage everyone to check out these two organizations. With that, we move on to the next speaker. We've talked a lot about biogas and biomethane, and now we're going to focus on a specific end use and end market, and we're going to look at aviation. And we're pleased to have Oscar, who's the head of future fuels from Sky Energy, which is one of the global leaders in SAF, with a mission to scale up SAF capacities around the world. Oscar, I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the opportunities for SAF around the world and specifically looking at Brazil. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you. You can see the slides, right? It's all good.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the kind intro, and thanks for having me today. As was said, quick intro. My name is Oscar Meijering. I've been with Sky Energy for almost 10 years, so quite some time in the sustainable aviation fuel space. And I want to use today's slot to tell a little bit about Sky Energy, what we're doing, and then I will give some highlights from our sustainable aviation fuel market outlook that we present every year, with obviously some focus on what that means for Brazil and the opportunity for sustainable aviation fuel in Brazil. So nice to meet you all, and good to be here today. Very quickly on a couple of slides on Sky Energy. We are a company based out of the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. We have been founded in 2009. So over 15 years in the space, always fully focused on sustainable aviation fuel. Creating the market was one of our key goals in those early years. So we've done a lot of the first flights, delivered fuel to over 50 airlines on all continents in the world. And now focus on both the commercial side of buying and selling fuel, as well as our, let's say, project development activities. I'll come to that in a minute. In last year and 2 years before that, we've raised quite some significant funding from both APG and Macquarie Asset Management to grow this market even further. We're quite active in sort of the full supply chain. So we look at new technologies, what can we use to produce sustainable aviation fuel, obviously building and developing sustainable aviation fuel capacity projects, and then at some point operating those assets. And as I mentioned, we're quite strong on the distribution and sales side. So we're active in that entire supply chain, and always keen to look at new potential projects, and partners that we can work with to further scale this market, because it's still a relatively nascent market, but there's a lot of opportunity to extend and further build that out. We have currently 3 main projects that we're working on. So our Delfzijl project, it's a HEFA-based project, so based on waste oils in the north of the Netherlands, is furthest to start of construction. And then there is 2 other projects, one in Sweden. That's a project Skycraft. So it's showing a EU flag there, but that's in Sweden. And then there's a project in the Pacific Northwest in the United States. And it's nice to have the presentation of Renate before me, because that's a project where we're focusing on using biogas or biomethane and transforming that into sustainable aviation fuel as a product. So it's a gas to liquids project with the aim of using more advanced feedstocks like manure, but also municipal solid waste. And through this process, we can unlock those streams for sustainable aviation fuel as well. Behind that, we have a funnel of projects and interests, including Brazil, to see whether we can do something with the feedstocks that are present there, of course. It's important, the sustainability side is very important to us. So we've always focused quite heavily on this, where we have our operation certified by both RSB and CORSIA, but also recently ICC. We don't touch anything that is food or feed. So it's a relative, let's say, EU vision and approach to this. We understand that there's other regions with a slightly different setup, but we've taken this approach for now. And even though we know that there's other feedstocks that may be sustainable in local context, we're very sensitive to indirect land use change effects, and we don't want to build up the industry of sustainable aviation fuel on things that could potentially harm the environment more than it can do good. So we're very actively assessing these pathways and understanding and discussing with governments across the world which pathways can be added and which are sensitive to unwanted effects. So we're in constant discussion with scientists and NGOs, and our operation and our company is also B Corp certified, which is a relatively strict certification to get. So with that quick introduction behind us, now on to the more interesting piece. So every year we make a sustainable aviation fuel market outlook. This year we published that in June, and we've done it together with ICF, so global consultant, very strong on the aviation industry. And before you can create a sustainable aviation fuel outlook, you need to understand a little bit more about the fossil jet fuel market. So we use their model for that, and it's a land per country based, let's say, model. So we add these country level forecasts, and with that we can determine the jet fuel forecast or the projection of jet fuel consumption over time. That is obviously taking into account new aircraft and more efficient operations. So aviation is expected to grow roughly 3 to 4% per year, is the industry forecast. And by mitigation measures and efficiency measures, you can lower the actual jet fuel consumption, and you come to this projection of about 400 million tons that we need in 2050. So that's a challenge. And then we, against that, start to assess, okay, how much SAF do we then need? And we have this prediction that we call the current trend scenario. So we basically have 3 scenarios, but we focus on the current trend scenario, where we build towards about 45% of all jet fuel being SAF in 2050. Obviously slowly building from approximately 4% in 2030. There's quite some differences in regions, right? So Europe is typically a little bit further. Some specific regions like Japan and Korea are also quite well advanced, where other countries and industries are still developing their targets. Brazil also very actively looking at sustainable aviation fuel and building the knowledge and policy to stimulate this industry. We then, when we know the demand, we then want to see, okay, how much actual capacity is in the market, and is there an opportunity to grow and build more capacity in certain regions and the world in general. So for that, we basically assess all the capacity and all the announced capacity in the market, and we do that by following the market, obviously, and checking all the announcements. And we exclude projects that are in a very early phase of development, or projects that are, let's say, basically stopped or paused based on non-communication for over 2 years. And then you'll get a picture like this. So what we're trying to do is determine, is there more or less capacity in the market to make the sustainable aviation fuel that we need to fulfill the demand. So in the background here, you see the gray area. That's basically the demand. So that's the graph that I showed in the beginning with building towards that 45%. And in front of that, you see the stacked capacity of announced projects. So building towards about 18 million tons of announced capacity in the market. And you see a number of things here. So on the one hand, you see that last year we had about 4 million tons of sustainable aviation fuel capacity in the market. But we also saw that there was only about 1 million tons of actual supply. That is because some of these facilities are renewable diesel or SAF facilities. So they can switch depending on what is the best market at the moment. But it also means that there is a certain overcapacity in the market at the moment, where there's more capacity than there is strong demand. Another thing that you see is that over 80% of the global capacity until 2030 relies on the HEFA pathway. So that means basically used cooking oil is one of the feedstocks that goes into that. And beyond, and the other thing, the final thing that you can see here is the big jump in demand that we need from 2035 onwards. So the big growth sits, let's say, after 2030. Then we're really seeing the increase in demand for sustainable aviation fuel, while there's obviously no new capacity, let's say, announced, but also limited in the ability to build that. So there you see a very interesting opportunity appearing, where there is still a big gap between potential supply and demand. What we also see is that we've done this assessment a few times, right? So we have done this for the 5th year in a row now, so we can look back at what we predicted last year in our 2024 market outlook and what we saw this year. And then you see a number of interesting elements. That one is, especially in the EU and the US, we saw a lot of cancellations and projects being either postponed or canceled in general, meaning that the announced capacity is a lot lower in the 2025 timeframe than we expected it to be last year. Also, even for 2030, we saw a decline in announced capacity, which is obviously contrary to what you expect with the growing market. The only difference there is Asia, where we do see increasing amount of projects being built. So this only to say that if you look at the EU and US, there's a bit of a retracting force, and it's going a little bit slower than what we anticipated. While in the Asian market, it's going still a bit quicker, but it also creates an opportunity for other regions like Brazil and South America and even Africa, where there is still a lot of potential to develop and build these projects. This builds towards this sort of shortage situation where there is more demand from policy in the 2035 timeframe than there is announced capacity, right? So we really need to, let's say, step up and start to increase the capacity that we see, especially for that 2030 till 2035 and beyond timeframe. So very interesting opportunity to develop into this market. We've then also, and it's a lot of graphs. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out afterwards as well. But I think it's important to also then look at 2050, right? So we've looked a little bit at a relatively short term, 2030, 2035. We also looked at 2050 and then assessed, okay, what type of SAF is actually demanded, right? And most of the world is relatively agnostic. So it doesn't really matter what type you make as long as it meets CORSIA criteria. Whereas Europe and the UK are quite prescriptive of what you can and cannot do under the mandates that we have. So there you see a specific demand for advanced biofuels and eSAFs, where the rest is, let's say, price competitive. So whatever is cheapest will be fulfilled with sustainable aviation fuel. And we then started to assess, okay, is it then even possible to fulfill all that demand with the feedstocks that we have and that we see. Because what we also know is that there's not enough basically waste oils or used cooking oil available to fulfill all that demand, right? So where does that other demand then comes from? And for that, we looked at a number of scenarios, of which I highlight the ones on the right, where it is possible, and we need additional policy, of course. But there are enough feedstocks to fulfill these targets. So that is a very interesting result. So on the left-hand side, you see the expected growth scenario that I showed all the way in the beginning, where we have a limited amount of waste oils and also low ILUC veg oils, as we call them, is the blue part. But the growth after 2030 very much needs to come from advanced biofuels, so biomass and advanced biosources, but also potentially some sugar possible there. And then obviously also ESAF. So both are, and we've done a lot of case studies into the Brazilian market, and we know that both of these tracks are, Brazil is very well positioned to be competitive, mostly because of the hydro capacity that is there that can fulfill, in combination with the wind power, very interesting power mix for ESAF, and obviously also the abundance of biomass and bagasse type feedstocks that can create a very interesting fuel. So we can do it. We even assessed on the right-hand side, what if we would, let's say, convert all the fossil jet fuel into SAF? Is that possible? And we do see, like, even though it needs a lot of support from policy and support mechanism, because that will be expensive, right? It is possible from a feedstock point of view, also taking into account other industries and other transport industries or heating industries that need certain feedstocks. We still believe that there is enough feedstock available to fulfill the demand for sustainable aviation fuel. So summarizing on the specifics of sustainable aviation fuel, we expect the demand to triple between 2030 and 2035, while project rollout is actually slowing down. That means that we see a supply gap looming, especially after the 2030 timeframe, creating interesting opportunities for additional projects. We also see that we will reach what we call a HEFA tipping point. So there's not enough HEFA to fulfill all the SAF demand in the market. So especially after 2030, we really need to start using and start scaling the advanced pathways in this space. And for that, we need to start now to develop these technologies. For Brazil specifically, we see that the feedstock opportunity is very positive. And there's a lot of opportunity of developing SAF projects in Brazil for both internal use as well as exports into other markets. So I'm quite positive and bullish on the Brazilian opportunity, and happy to talk with anyone that wants to discuss this in more detail. And feel free to reach out. So my contact details are on this. So if you have any questions after the questions that we can discuss, let me know.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Oscar, for sharing the current status of the SAF situation, but also an analysis into the future as to the potentials and the opportunities for bioenergy to meet some of those targets. I had a couple of questions. One was on the declining capacities. You mentioned the US, EU, and the UK have more cancellations than new capacities, whereas the other way around. Could you explain a bit more as to why that was happening?
Sorry, you fell away very quickly there. What? Can you repeat one more time the question?
You mentioned the declining capacities or reduction in capacities in the US, in EU, and the UK, whereas it was the other way around in Asia. We can understand Asia, but what's happening in US, EU, and the UK then?
There's a couple of, it's still a relatively small market, right? So it is determined also quite heavily by a number of small, or like very big, but small amounts of players. So we've seen that a number of the bigger oil majors like Shell and BP have retracted from quite a couple of projects that had a big influence in the total capacity in the near future. I think it has two reasons. One is, let's say, more macroeconomic some slowdown in the interest in sustainability, to be honest, which is very unfortunate, of course. The other reason is also that specifically for sustainable aviation fuel, on the very short term, there is a relatively well-balanced supply and demand situation, with the demand being relatively small still from the mandated markets, and also the voluntary market still building. While there's a couple of bigger assets that have come online in the past year or two, that creates also pressure on price. So there's just an economic reason why some projects are delayed more towards the 2030 timeframe, rather than coming online directly. So it has both a macroeconomic element in Europe and the US specifically, and also just some bigger companies that have not taken certain investment decisions, and therefore projects got delayed or postponed.
Thanks for that. And there were a couple of questions on the feedstock. One was on have you considered using other non-edible oils apart from waste cooking oils?
Yes.
Have you looked at novel feedstock? That was one question. And a similar question was on estimating the potentials of these waste oils. Sometimes these estimates are very wildly. Do you think we have a good grasp of the estimation, the potential for the waste oils, or do you think it's vastly overestimated or underestimated?
To answer the second question first, I think we have quite a good understanding of it, to be honest. There's obviously an element of collection rates and all that. In principle, especially used cooking oil is a factor of culture, how much cooking there is, but also a question of population. So there's quite good models to assess how much there is. It's also relatively well tracked. There is still some improvement to be done on collection, but with the prices that we see now in the market, that is also increasing quite rapidly. So that is relatively well understood. Obviously, there's a dynamic between the markets where there is a willingness to then pay more for those feedstocks in marine or in aviation that can create shifts. But relatively well understood. On the first question, the growth, yes, we've looked a lot at other non-edible oils like carinata, camelina, cover crop type crops. Super interesting. I think it's a little bit slow yet in really scaling. I think it is because the European Commission is not yet clear on what is allowed under the mandate, why there is a little bit of a holdback in developing. That's one reason. The other reason is it's simply more expensive than the waste oils and has a slightly worse CI score at the moment. So the reason for doing that is not really there yet in a competitive market, but it will be once we get more in more of a shortage situation on the UCO and other waste oil side. So I definitely see that playing a big role in let's say from the 2030 timeframe onwards.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Oscar. Again, any questions, we'll post it to you after the webinar and we can follow up. But thanks for your intervention. Next, we move on again to biomethane, and I'm pleased to invite Lucas Avila, who's a business development coordinator for biomethane at NDC Energia. I just wanted to mention that the World Bioenergy Association, we're actually launching a documentary series called Bioenergy Horizons next week, and MDC Energy is one of the partners in that series, and it's come out quite well, and I'm looking forward to hear the corporate perspective on biomethane in Brazil, yeah, Lucas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think Renata and we are going to touch some similar subjects over here. But let me start introducing myself. My name is Lucas Davila. I have become an environmental engineer to work with renewables. Very young, I decided that I wanted to do it. I remember that I saw in the early 2000s a group of researchers producing biodiesel with residues. That was mind-blowing for me, and this is why I decided to work with it. In 2015, I started to research about biogas. In 2021, I joined MDC. Today, I am working here as a business coordinator. helping to develop biomethane projects. So it's a pleasure to be here to share my thoughts, my perspectives on this market with you. And a lot of the things I'm going to talk here is based on my experience on developing those projects, the challenges we have here in Brazil. Just a little bit about NDC. NDC started its operations in 2006 by doing the transportation of natural gas by CNG. Then in 2010, the company decided to invest in the biomethane market to shorten the distance between the production of the molecule and the consumption of the gas. And the company was responsible for implementing and operating the first biomethane plant industrial scale here in Brazil. Also the first one to inject the biomethane into a pipeline. Currently, we have 3 plants under operation and 3 more under construction, all of them capturing biogas from landfills. Keep this information in mind. And last year, MDC was responsible for 40% of the Brazilian biomethane production. So before talking a little bit about the challenges we have here in Brazil, I wanted to show you a timeline so you can understand how new this market in Brazil is. So when we see that everything started with the first biomethane industrial plant to be specified, it was in 2014. This plant started its operation even before the agency here regulated biomethane. In 2015, the biomethane from biodigestion was specified, and only 3 years later, the biomethane from landfills was specified. So this was an important milestone because with the regulation, we could be able to inject this biomethane into a pipeline. So in 2017, the first biomethane plant started to inject biomethane into the pipeline because of the regulation. This was an important milestone for our country. And for many years was the first and only plant to do the injection into a gas grid. We are now only in 2025 starting to see new projects doing the same thing. So it took several years to the market to grow in this direction. In 2020, we had the first program to incentivize the production of biomethane, the Renova that Renata also has mentioned. It's very, very similar to the low carbon fuel standard, where fossil fuel distributors must buy a certain amount of credits from the producers of the biofuels to incentivize its production. Then in 2022, we also had an important milestone, was the first Brazilian transaction of guarantees of origin of biomethane. It was important because it allowed companies that were willing to do the claim of the biomethane, even though not receiving the physical molecule. And this was so important that in 2024, the Fuels of the Future law that was approved, that starting in 2026, natural gas producers and importers, they must buy a certain amount of biomethane, but they can also buy guarantees of origin to have this flexibility. This is very important for the Brazilian market, and you will understand a little bit later why this is important. Then in 2025, this number has been changing a lot, but Brazil is set to reach the first 1 million cubic meter per day of installed capacity. Renata has shown recently that today we have 16 plants. I got this number last week and we had 15, and it has been increasing very, very rapidly. I remember when I started in 2021, we had only 3 biomethane operations authorized by ANP. Now we have 16, and in the coming years, we are going to have more than 50. So the market's growing very fast. But now that you have an understanding of how new this market is, I wanted to talk a little bit about the paradox of the biogas and biomethane sources here in Brazil. Basically, the sector is divided in 3. Industrial, where we have a lot of potential coming from sugarcane industries. Actually, sugarcane is responsible for more than 90% of the potential from industries. Then we have agriculture, which is an important sector for our economy. Brazil is a major producer of cereals and meat. So we do have a lot of residues that can be used to produce biogas. And finally, sanitation. Brazil relies on landfills to dispose the residue, and we have some potential coming from landfills and wastewater treatment plants. Actually, when we see the theoretical potential, this was published by Abiogas, Brazil can have a potential of production for biomethane of 42 billion cubic meters per year. Half of this potential is coming from sugarcane, 44% from agriculture, and only 6% for sanitation. And this 42 billion cubic meters, just to give you a perspective, it is twice the amount of natural gas that Brazil is consuming today. But when we see the real production, Brazil last year produced 74 million cubic meters per year of biomethane. This is much less than 1% of the theoretical potential. And when we look where this biomethane is coming from, almost 100%, 97% is coming from landfill, the sector that has the smallest potential. So why does it happen? So why we are not still exploring the potential from industrial and agriculture? What are the challenges? And just to add to this information, this graph from the Biogas and Biomethane Outlook, published in 2025, it shows that Brazil is in the first place of potential for biogas production. But in fact, we are producing less biogas than United States, than Europe, and other countries. So what is happening here? Well, talking about the challenges, I have got 5 items I would like to share with you based on my perspective. The first one, I would say, is scale. As we can see here, this graph is from the same publication. The number that we see is not representative for the Brazilian market, but the trend of this graphic is the same. So the cost of production from biomethane from landfill biogas is the smallest one. I think this by itself explains a lot why we have started to produce biomethane from landfills over here. But when we talk about biodigestion, Brazil has more than 1,600 biogas facilities, but they are too small to justify the biomethane production. They are producing less than 100 cubic meters per hour of biogas. They are basically located in manure, to treat manure in farms, and the biomethane doesn't justify. So to make sense, what we are starting to see here is a business model that tries to gain scale. So projects are built to receive several sources of residue from different sources. And the business model over here is different. You need to find ways to add value beyond biomethane. So charging a gate fee for the residue you are going to treat, or monetizing the CO2, recovering nutrients to sell the digestate, and so on. Those extra strings of revenues, they are super important to make those projects feasible. So the business model here is very different, but we are starting to see projects doing like this here in Brazil. The second challenge, I would say, is seasonality. As we saw before, half of our biomethane potential is coming from sugar mills. But on average, the harvesting season lasts 200 days a year. So you are not going to be able to produce the biomethane throughout the year. Having an off-take contract in this condition is more complex. And also the capex is much higher than a landfill. And since you are not going to operate throughout the year, the return on investment and the payback is much longer. So this is the challenge over here. But we are also starting to see some mills that are producing biomethane smallly, first to replace the diesel from its production, which makes a lot of sense because diesel represents a high cost for those mills. And then afterwards, starting to sell the biomethane to the market. The third challenge I bring here is the achievable price. The cost of production of biomethane is typically higher than the market price for natural gas. So sometimes you won't have nearby companies that are willing to pay the price of the biomethane because they are not concerned about reducing emissions. They are just concerned about the molecule, about energy. So this is why it's super important to have market instruments to give flexibility to consumers that want to pay the price of the biomethane to do so, even though not receiving the physical molecule. And we can do it by using the instruments, the gas rec instruments or guarantee of origin instruments. And related to this topic, we have the GHG protocol. So currently, GHG protocol does not have clear guidance on how to use those instruments under Scope 1. It does not prevent you from using. Companies can use it. It's up to the company to decide. But the market demands clear guidance on how to use it. So it's super important for the voluntary market that this guidance should be released very soon. And we know that the GHG protocol is working to release it in the coming years. And for the Brazilian market, a mass balance would not make any sense. As you can see here, our infrastructure is very poorly developed. When we compare to United States and Europe, Brazil have the infrastructure located in the coastline, and hence the consumption of natural gas and eventually biomethane will be confined nearby, while the potential for the biomass is not. So having a market instrument under mass balance, under book and claim system would make a lot of sense for our market here in Brazil. And since our infrastructure is not well developed, we are still going to rely on CNG and eventually LNG to do this distribution of all this potential that we have over here. And when we see developed countries in this graph over here, advanced economies are using biomethane, the majority of the production, to replace diesel. And this is something that Brazil is still not exploring. We don't see biomethane being used to substitute diesel in heavy fleets. This is starting to happen. And I am sure that these advanced economies just made it possible because of climate commitments and because of policies. So I think Brazil has recognized how strategic the biogas and biomethane is for achieving its NDCs under the Paris Agreement. And I see that the sector, the biogas and biomethane, has a lot of synergies with several programs that the Brazilian government has created that is related to waste management, related to recovery of organic residues, avoidance of methane emissions, sustainability in agriculture, and so on. So now that we have those frameworks, it's important to the decision makers that they should create the legal and regulatory structure to give confidence to the market to invest and to make this market growth. And finally, this is my last slide. I think this information over here is very interesting, is that 80% of the world potential for biogas is in Brazil, India, and China. All those countries faces the similar challenges. And it's very important for us to have ways to overcome those challenges to reach this full potential. And when we think that local production has a global decarbonization effect, it makes a lot of sense to have an international book and claim system that could enable global climate benefits, even though you are not transporting the molecule to be used physically in a different country. In the last 5 years, I have talked to several companies from Japan, Europe, United States that are trying to import the biomethane to be used over there. But when we think that we need to use more fossil fuel to transport the fuel just to have the benefit of decarbonization, it may not make any sense. And to conclude my presentation, I just would like to emphasize that this market is driven by decarbonization. We should not forget the reason that made us as a society to develop renewables in the first place. It's not because we don't have fossil fuels to be used, we still have a lot of it, but we shall not forget the consequences that we have when using them, not only for the climate, but for society and for the economy. So here I end my presentation, and you have my contacts over here if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Lucas, for sharing your work and your experience in setting up projects, biomethane projects in Brazil. There were, of course, some very impressive numbers that I came across. 40% of biomethane market in Brazil. That's a lot for a particular company. And I think I also read somewhere that you had one of the projects he handles is at the one of the world's largest landfill sites, so the second or the third largest landfill site. So you can just imagine the scale of some of these projects in Brazil. It's just on another world. There's also, I think, there's we visited one of the world's largest bioethanol facilities as well, and it's just like a city itself when you see the scale of that. But at the same time, as you pointed out, there's so much potential. So at 1% or less than 1% that is being utilized right now. So yeah, that's a lot of opportunity there. But thanks for highlighting all the challenges as well. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I do have one question on the current use of biomethane. I think you might have mentioned before, but you talked about injecting into the gas grids. But if you look at the current existing frameworks, do you think would be the primary source of primary market for the biomethane in Brazil, or do you see marine fuels and other opportunities coming up? And what would be needed from a company perspective for you to access some of these end markets for biomethane?
Yes. Well, in my perspective, there is two ways that we can grow the demand for biomethane. Currently, the majority of the produced biomethane is being used by industries. A small portion is being used by vehicles, but small vehicles, right? Not heavy-duty fleet. But in the coming years, since we have the mandate for biomethane and the producers of natural gas and importers, they must buy a certain volume, they will decide actually in the end who is going to use. And I think the industrial use will be the majority of the demand will come from the industrial use. Then we will have heavy fleets, but we still need to build the infrastructure to make it possible. The state of São Paulo, for example, they announced that now they are converting the public buses to use biomethane. So it does make a lot of sense for them. So firstly, industrial use, then heavy duty, and then I think we are going to see something related to marine use, because you need a lot of volume available to make sense, and we still do not have this volume.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, there's a lot of initiatives ongoing on industrial decarbonization, both at international levels, but at national levels as well. And maybe that could definitely support the uptake. Public procurement for biomethane in, for example, city buses. There's a lot of stuff happening in Europe, in many cities where there's mandates for public procurement for renewable fuels, including biomethane, which would also support the uptake in heavy vehicles. But yeah, and marine fuels as well later on. But yeah, thanks for sharing that information. And since we are talking about marine fuels, now we've touched upon biomethane and we touched upon aviation, but now we're going to look at the maritime sector. And I'm pleased to have Felipe Fernandez, who's the commercial director for the LATAM region. For Bunker One, which is one of the world's leading, or one of the world's leading bunkering companies. And they're going to talk about, or he's going to talk about the marine sector, biofuels, and opportunities in Brazil. We very much look forward to hearing your presentation, Felipe. I hope you can hear us, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending this. I'm just start sharing here now. I hope you can see that. Thank you for that. I have the task of being the last, but that also reflects a little bit about the marine segment and the role of marine segment in the decarbonization and the green transition. I'll give this a little more of a practical approach for many reasons, but first because my background is from trading. I'm a commercial director from Bunker One in Latin America. And I come from trading, not research, not business development, and we have hands on deck there on the supply and demand side, and this gives us a perspective of what's really the demand and the development looking like for the marine segment. Just a quick intro on Bunker One. Bunker One is the physical supplier of marine fuels, a global part of Bunker Holding, and ultimately USTC umbrella. This is one of the largest conglomerates in Denmark with $18 billion revenues. And Bunker Holding is the main company of the conglomerate, private-owned Danish company. And Bunker One is the physical supplier. That means that we employ or own the assets that will bring marine fuel from point A to point B, B being the ships, the vessels where that do the world trade as well as regional trade. So as you can see, our global footprint, there's multiple offices, both in trading as well as physical around the globe. We're present in all regions. And this is our little office realm, basically a Latin map. This green points is where we have physical operations and assets. We also have a global coverage over trucks, MGO and diesel around these areas. But I'm not here to talk about Bunker One. I'm here to talk about the challenges and opportunities of the decarbonization in the marine segment, right? So, and this is the first slide that actually talks about that. And this slide can be both used in conventional fuels as well as alternative fuels, right? So the practical approach I was mentioning is mainly because in the marine segment, we face challenges that other segments don't. For instance, we're not regional at all. We're mostly global. That means that both clients and suppliers are spread out and similar to aviation, but different than aviation. Our ship, to run a ship, it can go anything from 50 to 80% of the running costs on fuel, right? And aviation, if I'm not mistaken, my colleague Oscar can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 25 to 30%. The second thing is the marine segment has a deep inflationary aspect that the other segments usually do not have, because we trade, most of the global trade, is relies on the marine shipping industry. So to transport any goods from point A to point B, 90% of the time is going to use a ship. And if you increase the ship running costs, it will increase automatically anything that you buy or sell across the globe. Aviation, for instance, has some trading on it, but also but primarily the clients are us, right? There are, of course, traveling around the globe, and then we can afford, or we may be able to afford a little bit of a increase on prices, whereas in the marine segment, not really. So, and third but not least, we are coming from bunkers, and bunkers are basically the last and portion of the refining segment. That means that our added value on the Brent, for instance, is sometimes in a discount and not an added like the jet fuel or gasoline or diesel. Again, coming back to the slides here, connecting the dot means that we have the producers, we have to navigate the regulations, we have to map the supply opportunities, we advise and consolidate the demand, we facilitate the credit to our clients, and then at Bunker One, for instance, will do the last mile delivery, as we call. So we build the infrastructure that will bring the fuel to our clients in the end of the day, right? But talking about decarbonization and the green transition, it all starts. It started a few years ago. In 2020, we had the IMO getting the sulfur content down to 0.5%. It was already a sign that we were starting to discuss the green transition on the sulfur, but then the carbon came basically and more actively in 2023 when IMO set the ground for the future of a net zero by around 2050. Another challenge we face is we have to gather a bunch of people around the table to discuss regulations over a very sensitive topic that has to, for instance, in the latest MPEC meeting we had last month, the rules and regulations that IMO was targeting, they got pushed by a year because of the macroeconomic scenario and the trade wars we're facing around the globe. But we have some regulatory framework to work with. Basically, starts with CII and EEXY, which is both operational and technical framework from the IMO. That has no penalties, but it certainly reflects on owners that will have some kind of reputation if their carbon intensity indicator is very high. They will then have lower access to credit to finance their ships, for instance, as well as depending on the region, even some sanctions or regulations as EU. Then passing by to EU, that is the only place where you have a mandate carbon market brought by FuelEU as well as EU ETS. EU ETS 2024 and FuelEU this year in place, and will increasingly be more challenging to navigate for deliveries and supplies across the EU, ships going back and forth this region. But we still have the up-and-coming IMO midterm measures. Again, they're requiring GHG intensity of marine fuels and pricing mechanism. This presentation is a few weeks after what just happened in IMO that got pushed back by a year. Should we be in the webinar that was a couple of months ago, we would be a little more optimistic. But still, there are places where we can go, region approaches that I'll talk about down the line. As you can see in the other graph here, you can see that how the basket of marine fuels is looking like these days, and how it will be looking like in 2030 or in 2050, right? So that means that you can see the blue one is HFO. Let's focus on the 2025. The blue one is HFO, which means high sulfur fuel oil, and the light brown one is the 54%, which is the VLSFO. So both combined, over 70% of the marine fuel consumed these days are still fuel oil, and 20% is marine gas oil or diesel for anyone who is not from the industry. That means that more than 90% of all the fuel commercialized in the shipping industry is still coming from fossil. If you add the LNG, that goes almost 100%. That means that biofuels and methanol and ammonia is a no-go. No, that means that we have a lot of room to grow, but the challenges are multiple, especially because the reasons I mentioned previously. Future, it will be dictated by a number of variables from the IMO resolutions and regulations, from regional approach, from technology, and as well as competitiveness from the other feedstocks and sources of marine fuels, right? Because in the end of the day, we will have to be very much of a price-oriented industry because of the inflationary risk I mentioned before. Jumping to the Brazilian outlook, because we're here to talk about Brazil. We have three challenges there in Brazil. Brazil is a challenging country. Anyone who works here or have worked here knows that we have the what you call Brazil cost. That means it is hard to navigate. We do we we do our best here to navigate, but as our colleagues were mentioning, the regulations they tend to be built in a slower pace than elsewhere, right? So the first challenge I would mention is the testing slash specs, because bioblends, and a little disclaimer, I will be focusing on bioblends, which is biofuels fame, coming from different feedstocks, but mainly because this is the drop-in solution for the marine fuels, and because Brazil is have already dominated this fuel on the road transportation with regulations in place for the automotive industry. For instance, as Renata was saying, the RenovaBio regulation, as well as the mandate for FAME for automotive diesel, that is 14%, if I'm not mistaken, these days. So the regulatory still faces the bioblends are not yet included on the Resolution 903, which is the equivalent of ISO 8217, which is basically regulating of the specs of the marine fuels in Brazil. So it's not there yet. There are fiscal uncertainties. Anyone who worked here as well knows that the taxations and fiscal aspects of Brazil, it is the most challenging field to navigate. How will tax collection look for the blends? It's not clear yet. It's going to be based on the conventional fuel taxes. It's going to be based on the biofuel slash FAME taxes. Not clear yet. The last mile also a challenge, right? The freight. I'll be talking about this within the next couple of slides, but the long distances from the supply locations, I mean the biofuel producers, and the demand, ports where the ships are actually doing their operations, are long, very long, as you can see, as you will be able to see here. Can go, north for 1,000, even 2,000 kilometers distance to get from point A to point B as well. And the blending, meaning the infrastructure challenges, as Brazil do not have a very developed infrastructure in terms of blending and tank capabilities across the shorelines. That means that we need to find alternatives to blend those products, which is a challenge in itself. Then, of course, the sustainability, which is basically guaranteeing the sustainability across the supply chain in a multiple player scenario. The main certification these days in the marine fuels is going to be the ISS certification. Bunker One, Brazil, and multiple other brands from Bunker One, other offices from Bunker One are ISC certificated and can work, but we need to find partners that are also to be able to offer those in a large scale. So a little bit of the B100 production in Brazil. As you can see, it is growing, mainly because the mandates for the automotive diesel are also evolving and growing. But as you can see, the purple one means that other feedstocks, right? Because you have feedstocks of soybean oil, which is the primarily one that we have here. We have other vegetable oils, cotton, corn, palm, and multiple others. Macaúba, which is one that has been developing by our partner, Acelling, which is the Salvador refinery. We have the tallow, so animal fat there in light green, which is fairly steady. And we have on purple others. And these other ones are the ones that falls under the scopes that are contemplated by, RED, which is the legislation from European Union, that will discuss the fuel versus food issue, which both Renata also brought, and it is still a very large discussions amongst developing countries and the north, the global north. So as you can see here on the port activity, total cargo moved in 2024 as from ANTAC, which is the National Agency for Transportation in Brazil, is basically showing that the Southeast concentrate around almost 50% of the total cargo movement, and that also reflects on the ships that calls these ports. We have the Northeast of Brazil with mainly Itaqui, Salvador, Pecém, another 25%, and then the South and the North of Brazil will concentrate the remaining, and Central West, which basically is rivers, it's very, very small, right? And what does this have to do with the B100 or the green transition? Basically, we're discussing where the demand is in this slide and where the supply is in this slide. And then the supply, as you can see, is concentrated in almost 90% in the South and Central West, which again is less than 25%, is less than actually 15% of the demand. So we need to transport this B100, this production, from the regions that produces them, which is South and Central West, to the regions that will consume them, which are Southeast and Northeast. So that, again, in itself, a challenge. But again, I told I'm going to be practical. We can go for questions right away. I don't want to cover a lot of the regulations and a lot of the current issues, mainly because we have small time, but also to give room for questions, which are almost always more interesting than the presentation itself. So as a conclusion, we have the challenges, right? The challenges are very clear. We have the demand focus far from production, the road transportation for long distances. We have a competition for the feedstocks with aviation and road transport, which are willing to pay more because the end consumers, which are individuals, are usually more inclined to be able to accommodate those prices, whereas the marine fuels come from a very low price derivative, oil derivative. And that means the aggravated inflationary risk has a waterfall effect all over the shipping industry and ultimately for all the economies around the globe, right? But on a bright side, both of my colleagues here, fellow presenters, mentioned the future of the fuel of the future law, which has been approved. But again, the maritime industry is mentioned. We're on the right path, but it is not really clear where this will lead on opposite, as for instance the biomethane, which has a very clear a pathway and procedures and regulations already included in the fuel of the future law. Finally, some Brazilian ports also have incentives in place. That means that, again, we are on the right path. Itaqui, for instance, good to mention, that offers 5% on discounts over lower, what do you call that, carbon, lower carbon ships, as you can call. So if a ship has a good CII index or is burning biofuel or has some kind of a green initiative going on there, Itaqui port will present that, but also other ports in Brazil. And this is something that we see in a very good way going forward. But I think that's it for me. And we will be taking some questions now. right?
Yes, thank you, Felipe. We are just into 90 minutes, but I'll take an opportunity to extend it by 5 to 10 minutes more. One question to you was on ethanol. We talked a lot about
Yeah.
biodiesel, ammonia, and methanol, but a question on ethanol. What do you see the opportunity? I mean, ethanol definitely has a lot of opportunities in the supply, but I guess limited opportunities in marine. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah. So ethanol on the supply side, I mean, huge. It is the largest producer of the world. Brazil is, and especially in the sugarcane ethanol, which is with less GHG emissions and less food versus fuel discussions. But on the demand side, it's still very, very early days. I know that I saw that in the chat that Wärtsilä, Maersk have been conducting tests here, which is again very promising. But I mean, the average age of the fleet traveling around the globe is over 20 years old, right? So these things needs to be followed by a huge investments on new builds capable of actually burning these kind of fuels. And these new builds are almost always going through the biggest shipping lanes and trading routes, which Brazil is not part of. Brazil is a big country, is a big exporter. But if you compare that to, let's say, US, EU trading routes or China, US or East, West trading routes with bigger ships, we're not right there, right? So I believe that ethanol may have some usage on a regional approach and maybe some big ventures, but it may face its challenges given the price component as well as the mass adoption that needs to be done in order to build an infrastructure to offer those kind of fuels. So again,
Thanks for that.
biofuel B100. B100 is a drop-in solution. You can blend that to VLSFO. You can blend that to MGO. We have that in Brazil, so it's much easier to and people are already consuming this. Ships are already consuming that on a larger scale than methanol or let alone ethanol at this point of time.
Yeah, thanks for that. One question from my side, very quickly. I mean, you did talk about 90% of all the goods that are transported by ships, and that's why it's also very cost sensitive. But compared to aviation, it's also true that I don't know the exact number, but 30 to 40% or so of the transport is actually fossil fuels, so coal, oil, and gas, which are transported around the world. So when you start looking at decarbonization and reducing the use, supply and use of fossil fuels, that would also mean reduction. Wouldn't it mean a reduction in the demand for fuel for transporting these fuels? How does that come under your analysis or your perspective on that?
Absolutely. I can give a personal opinion. This is of course something that it has been discussed. But again, if we're not transporting oil, then we will be transporting biodiesel, right? We will be transporting ethanol. We will be transporting LNG, ELNG, which has more volume, bigger ships. So it will be a shift on how the fleet currently looks like from, let's say, VLCCs transporting hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil, and be replaced for hundreds of thousands of ELNG or cubes of ELNG or barrels of biodiesel or even ethanol or methanol. And so that will transform. But of course, there is a trend that the shipping will it's going to slow down, right? And maybe less demand going further. But again, you cannot forget about this transformational aspect of the fleet itself.
Yeah, thank you for that. And with that, we've come to the end of the webinar. I would take this opportunity for a very quick round of one quick question. We've been talking about emerging markets and opportunities for bioenergy there. From the perspective of the people who are on the call or on the webinar, there's a lot of end markets. There's aviation, there's maritime, road transport, You've got power, heat, and so on for the same amount of bioenergy molecule. So my question is, when you look at all these competing end users, do you see that as an opportunity for driving innovation in yields and efficiencies and finding novel feedstock? Is that a good thing? Or do you see that as a challenge when you talk of some markets able to pay more so that they could get more? Do you see that as positive or a challenge for the bioenergy sector when you have so much of these competing markets which would come online, already online right now or in the near future? Very broad question. Maybe Renata, you want to start and give your short take on that?
Well, I believe there's a lot to decarbonize, so it's a lot of opportunity. We have a long way to go. Sometimes we see discussions of clean energy sources competing, like it's a competition. For example, in some municipalities here, you see like EVs competing with biomethane, trying to compete. And I'm like, there's so much to do. We should be competing with diesel and not with each other. So and I do think we will need something really disruptive in the next few years in order to really go for the carbon neutrality we need by 2050. But for now, I see a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of changes, a lot of challenges in the way, considering measurable standards, considering certification, and a lot of that. But it sure is opportunities, and I believe that in the next few years, the next decade will be a decade of growth, a lot of new jobs, and a lot of new revenues, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Renata. Lucas and then Felipe.
Yeah, my personal perspective is that this is a good sign, actually. I mean, we need to go step by step, right? And when you have several sources demand in the biomethane, it means that you need to produce more and you need to invest more in the sector. So it can be a fuel for the sector to grow. So in my perspective, this new demand coming is a good sign for us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
Felipe,
share
last
that.
word.
I mean, coming from trading, it's all about demand and supply, and whoever can be on the edge of it and bring the technology and be able to pay more for the goods will succeed. And again, there's opportunities all across, and for the green transition and in not only in Brazil but all across the globe, we see that, and our company is very engaged on bringing this to the table.
Great. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll come to the end of the webinar. I would first of all like to thank all the speakers for taking their time to sharing their perspectives on the role of bioenergy in emerging markets. Thank you to the partners, Bioenergy Society and Bioenergy International, for helping us put together this program. Thanks to the audience. We see a lot of questions, and I hope some of the speakers can come back to you at a later stage on that. The slides and the video of the present webinar will be shared with everyone in a couple of days' time. I invite you all to explore an opportunity to be a member of the World Bioenergy Association to support our work in promoting bioenergy around the world. Soon, all the eyes will be on Brazil and in Belém as COP gets underway in the next 2 weeks, and we look forward to positive signs for promoting bioenergy around the world. Thank you all for your time, and I wish you good luck and the rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.